The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. A harsh wind swept through the valley, kicking up dust and debris. The planet was unforgiving, desolate and dry, with little more than the sharp, jagged rocks to break the horizon. This was a place where only the strongest could survive and only the most determined dared to face it. A battle had been raging for hours, the clash of alien weaponry and human resistance filling the air. Despite the odds, the human soldier refused to give in. His uniform was torn and stained, his body battered from the brutal assault. His name was Marcus, and he had been captured during an ambush, his comrades either killed or scattered. Now, he stood alone, surrounded by enemies. His body ached, his leg burned with pain, but he refused to fall. Before him stood his captor, an alien warrior. She was tall, with striking features that resembled a cat's, sharp eyes, pointed ears, and feline-like grace in every movement. Her armor was a sleek silver material that gleamed in the fading light, adorned with intricate markings that symbolized her rank. She had been trained to fight from the moment she could walk, and she was sure that Marcus, like all humans, would break under the pressure. Her name was Syra, and she had one goal: to prove that her species was superior to the humans. She believed that the human soldiers were weak, their bodies fragile, and their resolve even more so. It was her task to break Marcus, to make him realize the truth about his species. Humans were nothing but prey, easily captured, easily controlled. She circled him, the soft clink of her armor the only sound in the stillness. Her sharp eyes never left his. He was standing, but barely, his wounded leg giving way with every shift of weight. Syra raised her weapon, a long, curved blade designed to cut through flesh with terrifying precision. "Your people are weak," she said, her voice low and calm, the words carrying an edge of superiority. "I'll give you one chance to beg, for mercy. Tell me your weakness and I'll make your death swift." Marcus's breath was ragged, his chest rising and falling with each painful breath. He knew he was on the edge of collapse, but he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing him break. He had seen what happened to soldiers who begged. Mercy was a lie. His comrades had taught him that. He met Syra's gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet defiance. "I don't beg," he said simply, his voice strong despite the pain. Syra's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. She had been trained to see humans as weak. They were fragile creatures, their bodies easily destroyed by the weapons of her people, and yet here he stood, broken, but not beaten. "You're about to learn how weak you truly are," she hissed, and without warning, she lunged forward, her blade flashing in the dim light. Marcus barely had time to react. His injured leg gave way as he tried to step back, and he stumbled, barely keeping his balance. But his mind was sharp, and his survival instinct kicked in. He raised his arms to protect his vital areas, feeling the air hum with the speed of Syra's strike. She aimed for his leg, where the injury from the battle still bled through his torn uniform. Her blade would strike deep, she thought. Surely this would be the blow that finally forced him to scream. She would enjoy watching him writhe in pain. The blade struck, but there was no scream, no cry of pain. Instead, there was a loud, cracking sound, like the snap of a branch in the wind. Syra froze, her eyes wide in shock as she pulled her blade back. The weapon was no longer whole. The edge had shattered on contact with his leg. Her perfect, razor-sharp blade, designed to cut through armor, had shattered as though it were made of glass. She stared at the broken pieces in disbelief. Marcus smiled, a smile that was both painful and defiant. "Not bad for a weak human," he said through gritted teeth. Syra's hand trembled, but she quickly regained her composure. She stepped back, reassessing him. The human's strength was beyond anything she had expected. His body was battered, yet he had withstood the blow. Her eyes narrowed, and she studied him more closely. His leg was still bleeding, but his posture remained unyielding. He had not collapsed, not even after that attack. She had been trained to see strength in the ability to destroy. In her mind, power was all about crushing your opponent into submission, watching them crumble. But this human, he had endured it all. He had taken her best shot and remained standing. She had expected a scream, a show of weakness, but instead she was met with a quiet defiance. She had thought she would see fear in his eyes, but there was nothing there, nothing but calm resolve, like a stone that had weathered 1,000 storms. For the first time, Syra felt a flicker of uncertainty. "This is impossible," she muttered to herself. Marcus's smile faltered, replaced by a grimace of pain. His leg was agony, but it was nothing compared to the fire that burned in his chest. He had been through worse, and he knew he had to survive this. Syra stepped back again, her mind racing. She had underestimated him, and she wasn't accustomed to being wrong. Her people were known for their strength, their precision. They never failed in battle. But now she was faced with an opponent who would not break, no matter what she did. The air between them was thick with tension. Syra stood, silently, still trying to process what had just happened. She had seen humans crumble, beg for mercy. But not this one. This human warrior was different. "I don't break," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "And I won't." Syra narrowed her eyes, the silence stretching out between them. She could feel the change in the air, a shift in the balance of power. This battle was far from over, and for the first time she wasn't sure if she was the one who would emerge victorious. She clenched her fists, her mind working quickly. There had to be a way to break him, to prove that her species was the superior one. She couldn't let this human be the one to win, not after all she had fought for. But in the back of her mind, a question lingered. How could a human so seemingly fragile have such strength? Syra had much to learn, and Marcus's quiet defiance was just the beginning. The silence between them stretched, heavy and tense. The last rays of the sun slowly sank below the horizon, leaving the valley bathed in a soft orange light. A cool wind blew through the landscape, carrying the scent of dust and stone. The sound of Marcus's steady breathing was the only thing that filled the air. His leg was still throbbing with pain, but his mind remained sharp. Syra stood a few paces away, her hand still clutching the broken pieces of her blade. Her chest rose and fell with each breath, her thoughts racing. She had expected the human soldier to fall apart, to beg her for mercy or scream in agony. She had struck him with all her strength, aiming for a vulnerable spot. Yet he had not only withstood the blow, but also smiled, as though her attack had been nothing more than an inconvenience. Her weapon had shattered on impact, and his calm demeanor had shaken her to her core. "You're different," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words held more curiosity than accusation. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight to his other leg, grimacing at the pain but never showing weakness. His gaze remained steady, locked onto her with a quiet strength that confused her even more. He was clearly exhausted, wounded, but still standing. Syra's eyes flickered to the broken blade in her hands, and then back to Marcus. She had seen humans fall apart in the face of pain, heard them cry out in terror when cornered. But this one, he was different. There was something inside him that she couldn't quite understand. "What kind of human are you?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "Your kind is supposed to break under pressure, to fall apart when faced with pain. But you..." She shook her head in disbelief. "You're not like the others." Marcus met her gaze, his eyes filled with a calm intensity. There was no anger in his expression, no fear, just a quiet, unwavering determination. He had been in battles before, harder battles, where his life had hung by a thread. Pain wasn't new to him, but neither was this kind of challenge. He had learned long ago that surviving wasn't just about fighting. It was about keeping your mind clear, never letting the chaos get to you. "I'm just a soldier," he replied, his voice steady. "I don't break, not for anyone." Syra's jaw clenched. This human's words stung more than she wanted to admit. She had believed that strength was about being able to overpower your enemy, to crush them beneath you. But Marcus wasn't breaking. not even when his body was damaged. There was a strength in him that she couldn't quite grasp. It was different from anything she had ever encountered. She was used to crushing her enemies with her strength, with the raw power of her people. But Marcus had shown her that there was more to strength than just muscle. There was resilience, an inner fire that refused to be snuffed out. She took a step forward, still unsure of what to make of him. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice softer now. "How do you endure all of this?" Marcus didn't immediately respond. His gaze shifted to the ground where the shattered pieces of her blade lay scattered. He could feel the sharp sting in his leg, the blood slowly pooling beneath him, but the pain was familiar. He had been through worse. He had lost comrades, friends, people he cared about, and each loss had shaped him. But it was more than that. It was his reason for fighting, his will to survive, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That was what kept him going. "You just keep moving forward," he said finally, his voice low but fey. The days that followed were quieter. The battle had ended, but the silence left in its wake was louder than the explosions and cries that had filled the air just days before. The valley, once filled with the sounds of war, now seemed to hold its breath as if the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Syra had been guarding Marcus, but her role had shifted. She was no longer just a captor. She was a watcher, an observer. Her mind kept replaying the events of that first encounter, when her blade had shattered against his leg and he had smiled at her, unfazed. She had never seen a human react that way before. She had never seen anyone endure pain with such grace and strength. Marcus, for his part, remained quiet. His leg still hurt, and every step he took was a reminder of the battle he had fought and the toll it had taken. But he wasn't the kind of man to let pain define him. He had been through worse before, and this was no different. The pain would fade, and his mind would remain sharp. As long as he had breath in his lungs, he would keep going. They were alone now. The others, Syra's comrades, had left the valley to tend to other matters. They had made no effort to retrieve Marcus, assuming that he would eventually fall to his injuries, but they had underestimated him. And Syra, who had once thought of him as nothing more than a fragile, weak human, was beginning to realize how wrong she had been. She was still confused, still grappling with the image of Marcus that didn't fit with the one she had been taught to expect. Humans, in her mind, were weak. They broke easily, they begged for mercy, and they feared the pain that her people had learned to embrace. But Marcus was different. He had shown no fear. He had smiled, even when faced with agony. And now, as they sat together, both of them exhausted, from the battle she found herself questioning everything she had been taught. "Why don't you just give in?" Syra asked one evening, her voice quieter than usual. She had been thinking about it for days, and she finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why don't you just accept what's happened to you? You've lost, you've been captured, you're wounded, why do you keep fighting? What's the point?" Marcus, who had been sitting with his back against a rock, didn't answer immediately. His gaze was distant, staring at the horizon where the sky was turning dark. He could feel the weight of her question, the challenge in it. She didn't understand. How could she? She had never faced the kind of loss he had. She had never seen what it felt like to lose everything and still keep going. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "The point is simple," he said quietly. "I fight because it's what I'm here to do. It's what I've always done. The moment you stop fighting, the moment you stop pushing forward, that's when you truly lose. The rest doesn't matter. Pain doesn't matter. Losing doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you keep going." Syra stared at him, unsure of what to make of his words. She had always been taught to seek victory at all costs, to crush her enemies beneath her feet. But here was a human, wounded and defeated, telling her that it didn't matter if you won or lost. All that mattered was that you kept fighting, kept moving forward. It was a perspective that she had never considered before. "Why do you think that?" she asked, her voice still quiet. "What makes you believe that? What makes you so sure that it matters?" Marcus leaned his head back against the rock, closing his eyes for a moment. He could still feel the pain in his leg, the way it throbbed with every heartbeat, but he was used to it. Pain was just another thing to push through. Because I've seen people who stop fighting, he said slowly, his voice distant. I've seen what happens when you give up. You stop caring, you stop living, and once you stop living, you're already dead. I fight because I can. I fight because it's all I have left. There was a pause, a long stretch of silence between them. Syra didn't know how to respond. She had always believed that strength came from the ability to overpower others, to bend them to your will. But Marcus was showing her that strength was something different. It wasn't about overpowering. It was about enduring, about continuing, no matter what. Her eyes softened, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. She wasn't supposed to feel sympathy for her enemy. She was supposed to break him, not understand him. But the more she watched him, the more she realized that she couldn't break him. He was unyielding, like a tree in a storm, and she was starting to see that it wasn't his physical strength that made him formidable. It was his mind, his heart. She shook her head, trying to push away the doubt that was creeping into her thoughts. You don't get it, she said, her voice hard again. You're going to die out here. There's no one to save you. There's no escape. What's the point of all this? What's the point of fighting when you know you can't win? Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, unwavering. The point is that I don't need to win, he said softly. I just need to keep going. You can't break someone who doesn't care about losing. Syra's breath caught in her throat. She had never thought about it that way. She had always believed that victory was the only thing that mattered, that strength meant defeating your enemies and proving your superiority. But here was Marcus telling her that victory wasn't the goal, survival was. And he was surviving, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. For the first time, she felt something shift inside her. It was a feeling she couldn't name, a mixture of awe and confusion. She had always seen humans as weak, as fragile, as easily defeated. But Marcus was showing her that there was more to their strength than she had ever realized. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't like the humans she had been taught to expect. Syra didn't know what to make of it. She had never encountered someone like Marcus before. He wasn't a warrior like her, but he was something else, something she hadn't expected. And that made him dangerous in a way she couldn't quite understand. What happens when you stop fighting? She asked quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. What happens then? Marcus looked at her, his expression calm. Then you're no longer alive. You're just waiting to die. The words hung in the air between them, and Syra felt a shiver run down her spine. She had never thought about it like that before. She had always believed that strength came from victory, from power. But Marcus was showing her that strength wasn't about crushing your opponent. It was about enduring, about finding meaning in the struggle itself. As the night grew darker and the wind began to pick up, Syra stood silently, lost in thought. She had no answer to his question. She had no answer to anything, really. The certainty she had once felt about her own strength was beginning to waver, replaced by a growing realization that maybe she didn't know as much as she thought. Marcus, still resting against the rock, didn't offer any more words. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. He had said what he needed to say. And now it was up to Syra to decide what she would do with the truth he had shared with her. The night stretched on, and the stars above them twinkled like distant diamonds, cold and silent. Syra looked up at the sky, her mind racing. She had come here to break him, to prove that her species was superior. But now she wasn't so sure anymore. The human soldier had shown her a new kind of strength, one that didn't depend on domination, but on resilience. And it was that resilience that might just be the most powerful force of all. The days passed slowly, but the weight of their silence became heavier with each one. The once hostile environment between Syra and Marcus was now filled with an unusual calm, a truce that neither of them had expected. They both understood the reality of their situation. Marcus, a captured human soldier, wounded and vulnerable. Syra, a trained warrior, strong and certain of her people's superiority. Yet in the stillness between them, a different kind of understanding was starting to form, an understanding that neither could ignore. The valley was quiet now, the sounds of battle long gone, replaced only by the whisper of the wind and the occasional rustling of dried leaves. Marcus had become accustomed to the pain in his leg, though it still made movement difficult. He sat most of the time, keeping his eyes on the horizon where the sun rose and set, marking the passage of time in a world that seemed indifferent to human struggles. Syra, on the other hand, paced back and forth, her mind constantly turning over the same questions. Her thoughts were consumed with the human she was meant to conquer. How had he withstood everything she threw at him? Why hadn't he broken under the pressure like so many others would have? She had been trained to believe that strength was a simple matter of dominance, of control, but Marcus had shown her something else, something she hadn't known existed. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the valley, Syra found herself sitting beside Marcus. She had no particular reason for doing so, other than the strange compulsion to learn more about the human soldier. She studied him for a long while, noticing how he sat quietly, never asking for anything, never complaining about his pain. Marcus felt her eyes on him and glanced over. "What is it?" he asked, his voice rough from days of little water and rest. Syra didn't respond right away. She was still trying to understand the emotions stirring inside her. "You don't show fear," she said slowly, the words coming out as if she were testing them herself. "You don't show weakness. I've never met anyone like you." Marcus shrugged slag. The days had started to blur together. The sun rose and set in the same routine, casting its golden light over the valley, as it had for centuries. The landscape, so harsh and unforgiving, seemed to stand still, as if untouched by time. Yet, inside Syra, something had shifted. Something deep and profound had changed since she had first faced Marcus. And as much as she tried to ignore it, she could no longer deny it. For days now, the two of them had shared the valley. They had spoken less and less, but their silent companionship felt like the most meaningful part of their strange connection. Every morning, Syra would watch Marcus as he moved slowly and carefully, his injured leg still causing him discomfort. She saw the way he endured his pain with a quiet strength, never letting it show on his face. She could feel the weight of his resilience, and it troubled her in ways she didn't quite understand. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire. The crackling flames filled the air with warmth, but it wasn't the fire that kept Syra close. It was the feeling of being near him, of witnessing something she couldn't explain. She had expected to break Marcus. She had expected to see him crumble under her power. But instead, she found herself questioning everything she had been taught, everything she had believed about strength. "Tell me something," Syra said one evening, her voice breaking the silence. She wasn't sure why she asked it, but it had been on her mind for days. "Why do you fight so hard even now?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. He didn't answer right away, as if considering whether or not he should share this part of himself. It was something personal, something deep, but there was something in Syra's eyes, something that made him trust her even if just a little. "I fight for the ones I've lost," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "I fight because they can't fight anymore. Because they were taken too soon. I fight so that their sacrifice wasn't in vain. I fight because that's all I have left." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with emotion. Syra turned her gaze away, feeling something stir inside her that she couldn't quite place. She had always been taught to fight for victory, for glory, for power. But Marcus was telling her that his fight wasn't about those things. His fight was about honor, about remembering those who could no longer fight. It was about preserving the memory of those who had fallen. Syra felt a pang in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a feeling of longing, of loss. She had never thought about fighting for someone else's memory, for the people who had been taken from her. Her people fought for power, for control. They fought to dominate. But now, sitting beside Marcus, she realized that there was more to life than that. There was more to strength than conquering your enemies. Do you ever stop and wonder if it's all worth it? Syra asked quietly. If all this fighting is ever really worth it? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He knew what she was asking. He had asked himself that same question many times before. Was it worth it? The pain, the loss, the never-ending struggle. But the answer had always come back the same. Yes, it was worth it. Because as long as you fought, you were still alive. And as long as you were alive, there was hope. He turned to Syra, his expression somber. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it, he said, but then I think about the people who came before me, the ones who fought for something bigger than themselves. They didn't give up. And if they could keep going, so can I. Syra nodded slowly, taking in his words. She wasn't sure what to say. She had never thought about things in this way. She had always believed that the strongest were those who could take control, who could overpower their enemies. But Marcus was showing her a different kind of strength. He wasn't trying to conquer anyone. He wasn't trying to destroy. He was trying to honor the memory of those who had fallen. And in doing so, he had found a deeper kind of strength, one that came from within. The fire crackled between them, its warmth a small comfort in the cold air. Syra shifted uncomfortably, feeling something shift inside her. She had been trained to see humans as weak, as fragile beings who could easily be crushed. But Marcus had shown her something else. He had shown her the power of resilience, of fighting, not for victory but for something greater than yourself. She couldn't help but admire him. He was a soldier, yes, but he was more than that. He was a man with a purpose, a man who fought not for power, but for the honor of those who had gone before him. And that, Syra realized, was what made him strong. I never thought I would see a human like you, Syra said, her voice soft. You're not like the others I've fought. You're different. Marcus met her gaze, his eyes steady. Maybe we're all different in our own way. For the first time, Syra saw him not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but as a person who had a life, a purpose, a reason to keep going. She felt a wave of respect wash over her, and she knew that this was a feeling she couldn't ignore. She had spent so much time seeing him as weak, as someone to be broken, but now she realized that it wasn't weakness that defined him. It was strength. Strength in a form she had never understood before. And as the days went by, Syra found herself thinking about the human soldier more and more. She found herself questioning the beliefs she had held for so long. The world she had known, the world of domination and control, was no longer enough. There was something more out there, something that went beyond power, beyond victory. It was about honor, about remembering those who had fought before you, and about finding strength not in control, but in endurance. She had never understood what Marcus had been fighting for, but now she did. And as the days passed, she found herself asking herself the same question he had asked her. Was it all worth it? She didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time, she wasn't sure it mattered. The air was cool now, the oppressive heat of the day replaced by the refreshing chill of the evening. The fire crackled beside them, its warmth a small comfort in the otherwise still cold valley. Marcus sat with his back against a rock, his injured leg propped up carefully. He had become accustomed to the pain by now. It wasn't a new enemy, just another part of the war he had fought every day of his life. His body ached, but his mind was sharp. And as he looked across the fire at Syra, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. It had been days since they had first started speaking to each other, but things had shifted between them in ways Marcus couldn't have expected. Where there had once been hostility, there was now an unspoken understanding. He had not anticipated forming any sort of bond with Syra. She had been his captor, his enemy. But now, as she sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fire, He couldn't ignore the connection that had slowly begun to form. Sierra sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, but the way she looked at him, there was something different in her gaze. It wasn't the cold, calculating stare she had given him when she first captured him. It wasn't the look of a warrior determined to break her prey. It was something softer, something more complex. She was still a warrior at heart, but the lines between them had blurred. The silence between them stretched out, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt natural, the quiet moments punctuated only by the crackling of the fire. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It seemed there was nothing left to say, at least, nothing that needed to be said. They had both come to terms with the fact that their roles in each other's lives had changed in ways neither of them had expected. Marcus broke the silence first, his voice quiet but steady. "You don't have to stay here with me, you know. You could leave, go back to your people. I'm not going anywhere. You could report back to your commanders and tell them I'm dead. You don't owe me anything." Sierra's eyes flickered toward him, but she didn't immediately respond. The thought of leaving hadn't crossed her mind in days. She had been trained to think of victory and defeat, to see everything as a game of power, a matter of control. But now it wasn't so simple. She found herself questioning the very thing she had been taught to believe. Was victory truly the goal? Or was there something else? Something she couldn't put into words. "I don't know why I'm still here," Sierra said slowly, her voice almost hesitant, as though she was unsure of the truth behind her words. "I should be leaving. I should have taken you back to my people, taken you as a prisoner. But..." She paused, her brow furrowing as she searched for the right words. "But it doesn't feel right anymore. I've seen something in you that I don't understand, something I've never seen before." Marcus tilted his head slightly, intrigued by the shift in her tone. "What do you mean?" Sierra looked down at the fire for a moment, her fingers playing with the edge of her armor. "When I first captured you, I thought I was going to break you. I thought humans were weak, fragile things that couldn't withstand real strength. But now I see that it's not about power. It's not about crushing someone until they submit. It's about something else. Something that I don't know how to explain." Marcus remained silent, letting her words hang in the air. He had known that his endurance, his ability to keep going despite everything, had started to change her perception of him. But now, hearing her speak so openly, he understood that the change was more profound than he had realized. "I never thought I'd see a human like you," Sierra continued, her voice softer now, almost